to see some single species just side by side. Everybody knows that you're a long time no-tiller, and we noticed this ground is worked up. Why is that?
In 2019, the DOT put the wetland in, and they used this land to put the excess fill on. So then I did a little tillage on 2020 and had oats interseeded with clover in it. Then the next year I had corn and then soybeans and then winter wheat. This year, heavy rains we had and stuff, we had a lot of washouts and ruts, so then I took the opportunity to do deep tillage on it and then worked it up, and hopefully that's the last time I'll be doing tillage on this field for a long time.
All right, thank you, Dale. So this was planted, 2 drills side by side, worked perfect. We were able to plant 2 varieties at once, and the problem was it was really dry when we planted, and it didn't want to rain for 3 weeks afterwards. So what you see here, we've got a sign in front of every single one. We've got a little sample of seed if you want to know what some of these exotic things look like, and just a few comments on each one as we go past. Oats is, of course, a really popular cover crop in fall. One thing I caution against is if you're growing it for forage in fall, it can get hit by rust. And looking at this oats, I don't see any rust, but just driving around the countryside, there are a fair amount of farms that planted oats and peas or oats for forage and is getting nailed by rust really bad. For that reason, I really like barley. So then the next is just plain old winter wheat here. And then we'll mention, because we did tillage after many years of no-till, we bought up a bunch of weed seeds, and there is some volunteer wheat in every one of these. So just keep that in mind. But winter wheat, we all know what that looks like. And one of the ones we wanted to try just to see is winter barley. I've been intrigued by winter barley because I really like spring barley. So that's what we've got here. Comparing the two side by side, you can see spring barley is a wider leaf, more top growth, but that winter barley is not far behind, and it's giving us a lot more leaf coverage and top growth than what winter wheat is doing.
I guess it's really no different than rye. I only tried a little bit for 1 year, last year. It turned out good, I thought.
Okay.
It wasn't quite as aggressive as a rye.
Okay. Did you harvest it for forage, or it was just to cover?
Just to cover.
Okay, Derek, your experience with winter barley?
Pretty much the same thing. It comes on in the fall like this, you'll get some decent growth. In the spring it comes on a lot like winter wheat, where it's more of a slower progression, unlike soil rye where it can shoot up, feet in a week. So from that aspect, it's been nice from the management side of it so far, but we've only been doing it, this will be the third fall it's been planted now. So there's some newer varieties coming out that are more winter hardy. That's why I think it's a up and coming cover crop possibility.
So consistently, your experience has been it has overwintered. Is that what? Yes.
It came in real nice.
And yes. Okay. One of my favorites is the spring barley, because out of all the winter cereals, or all the cereals that you can plant in fall, it has a nice wide leaf. It gives you good cover. Grows up this way. Oats is probably pretty close, but what we mentioned about the oats is that it can get rust. This can get a powdery mildew, but it's nowhere near as severe as what happens to oats. Sometimes. Doesn't always happen to oats, but it is happening this year. The one I like to bend everybody's ear about is a mixture. Year off winter wheat and year off spring barley. That can either be surface spread, can be surface spread and VT'd in, can be drilled. The reason I like that, the advantages that I already mentioned on barley, but is kind of all about nutrient cycling. So you can see what we got here in fall. We got kind of the advantage of both. This is what this is going to look like in December. The barley kind of stays alive until it gets real cold. And that's these wider leaves. Then you can see the winter wheat here. This is the same system then in spring. Barley's dead, but underneath that you've got living winter wheat. And the reason I like this is all about nutrient cycling. The aggressive growth on the barley, aggressively taking up nutrients, locking it up over winter. Now it's in a form where it can be leached out of that dead plant tissue, but we have got wheat here that can actively take it up. One of the advantages of winter wheat as a cover crop is it's not so aggressive in spring as winter rye. Winter rye is a wonderful cover crop, but I think we've all experienced that in some cases it can get away on us. It can give us too much growth, more than what we want. So again, back to the concept of nutrient cycling, we see this happening here. Now the same system, a couple weeks later, once the soil warms up, is amazing. This is the same field, and I'm looking at it, it's like, where did that barley go? Did it dry up and blow away? No. What this pen is pointing out is the little earthworm castings just all over. Earthworms love that dead barley in spring. It's a form that they can readily digest. And talk about nutrient cycling, they grab those nutrients, put it in their bodies, they're excreting it, and the winter wheat is using those nutrients. A couple weeks after this, we're terminating the winter wheat, planting corn into that, and those nutrients get cycled into the corn. Winter rye, we're all familiar with winter rye, so you can see maybe doesn't give you the top growth, but it sure makes a carpet. Great cover crop. I don't need to say a whole lot about it. You can plant it anytime. And then we tried some peas. So Austin, can you dig up, just real quick on some of these, dig up a plant. And the reason we're looking at these kind of plants is to try to get some nitrogen. These are all legumes. He's going to quick look at the roots for nodulation to see if we can get some nitrogen in fall. So you got to look really close, maybe walk around there, but you'll see little white nodules on the peas. That's typical. Just kind of pass it around, Austin. We'll move on to the next one. That's spring peas. These will be dead in spring. And then one we wanted to try as an experiment would be the Survivor Winter. So one thing you notice right away, you don't get near the top growth. They're kind of squatty. I've seen them a couple times make it through winter, especially if they're with a winter cereal.
Really hard to get established, I think.
Yeah, they do seem to be not as vigorous. Like I said, my experience, I've seen it with winter rye that they actually made it through the winter. But you know what happens with winter rye in spring? It just goes to town. It grows, and these have been really slow growing in spring. So you might have rye this tall and winter peas this tall. So as far as adding to the forage, I kind of question that. But what it would be doing is fixing nitrogen.
A couple years ago, we played around with winter peas after talking to some other folks who are more involved in cover crops. And I think the key that we noticed with winter peas is planting date. So a lot of times we want to get cover crops in early, get some root growth on them so that they can make it through the winter. I think with peas, there's a little bit different of a concept because you got to consider where the growing point is for that pea. And if we're planting it in August, that growing point is probably out of the ground. So what we were guided to do was to plant winter peas in late October, 1st of November, put them in 2 to 3 inches deep. So essentially they're there, but if they do grow, they're not coming out of the ground far enough that the growing point's coming out. And then the following spring is really when they take off. And we had pretty good success with that. We only tried it the 1 year. We'd like to try it a little bit further, again here in the future. But I think that's just some of the some of the tweaks that we got to consider with some of these cover crops is, you know, we always think fall growth maximize, but I think there's a few other things to kind of consider when doing that.
I wanted to try some weird things. Shoshone, it's sainfoin, and I'm not even sure I'm saying it right, but right here, this is it.
Okay.
It's another legume. I think it's more adapted to dry climate. The seed is really weird looking. I think they call it rattle pod in some parts of the country.
So one of the farms that Matt and I work with in the Upper Fox had sainfoin. He planted it last summer in June, more or less to try it. It did survive the winter last winter. I'll caveat that with it was a fairly easy winter, but we did not see a ton of nodulation digging it up like you would expect from most legumes. He was interested more from the forage aspect of it, taking a cutting. I don't know that he actually took a cutting, but that's kind of what he's just playing around with to see what it does. So I haven't seen a lot of positive stuff out of it yet. It kind of looked like we had a similar plot last year and we got about as much growth planted in August as this is showing. So haven't seen a lot out of it, but it is very popular and actually grown as a forage in North Dakota, South Dakota, further west. So I think there's something to the drier climate.
Safflower is one that we wanted to try. I know a lot of farms grow some sunflowers in their multi-species mix, and this is actually in the sunflower family. You can see it's the little white sunflower type seeds. Just reading in the Hay and Forage Grower that there's actually a forage type of safflower, so something to look at. One thing I was impressed with it, for the late planting, it does give you a fair amount of top growth, so it's maybe one to consider in a multi-species mix. This one, and you'll see it right in front of you as you're standing in these strips, but I was intrigued by winter lentil, and actually I'm impressed at how much of it came up. It's kind of a squatty plant, kind of spreading out. Austin, can you dig up some roots? But what I noticed already right away is it did have nodules. So it looks like it's producing nitrogen for us. Whether it actually makes it through the winter or not, we'll find out. But it's one that's piqued my interest. Sun hemp, I know a fair amount of folks have tried that. It's not real thick in here. You can kind of see the rows. It's more of a tropical. It's actually a legume. It'll get real tall, yellow flowers. This came up late, so we're not expecting this to flower. It's got merit after wheat. If you can get it planted early.
It hasn't really done a lot. I've been mixing it in. This year I put sorghum Sudan in, and that really overtakes everything. Sun hemp is there, but I guess maybe I didn't have it thick enough.
Hairy vetch is the next one. This one I've always had good luck with, but in this here it's hard to find, and it is a very fine lacy type of leaf, but we just, I don't know, it didn't like the conditions we planted in. Here it is. Yeah, so this is very fine, you know, not much top growth in fall is kind of typical. It does tend to overwinter, and it actually is a good nitrogen producer. Why it's not performing well here, I really don't know. One thing to notice, I learned this fall planting it, we had a couple of different patches or batches of seed that what I would call hairy vetch was a real large seed, but we also had a lot that really small seed, and I think it's two different varieties.
Yeah, we've done a lot in interseeding situations, cover crops. Like Steve said, it overwinters usually pretty well. It can be spotty. Last year we had in a cover crop plot, we had real good patches of it, real fine. One thing I have noticed with especially the interseeding side of it, it's fairly hardy against chemical pressure. It seems to come through a lot of different chemical programs, which can be a benefit for if you're trying to do interseeding and get rid of some of the weeds. So it's a pretty resilient plant overall.
Don't just go by this, because it normally is pretty successful to establish. And then crimson clover. So looks a lot like red clover. If you look down, you can see the rows. And here again, because we're seeding this very shallow in his grass seed box, it just sat there for 3 weeks. Finally, now it's coming up. So this is a species that normally does overwinter, in my experience, and it's also a good nitrogen producer. One is it just red clover? Yep, just red clover. We're all familiar with that. Same thing. We're actually getting a good stand now. Whether any of these clovers make it through this winter with the very little growth they have is pretty questionable, but got to try. And then we've got, what is it? Berseem. Yeah, this is a Berseem. Not as good a catch. As it grows, it looks a lot like alfalfa, but it's called a clover. I think here's one here that came up early. Sometimes it overwinters, sometimes it doesn't. This particular variety is supposed to winter most winters.
A number of years ago I planted it and it was spotty coming up, and it was just Berseem, I think, maybe with some oats or something. But this year I put it in the mix and I got it in right after I combined. I spread my straw, so the next day I was out there planting and I got Berseem that's that high. And it looks pretty even across the field, so it turned out real good this year.
Yeah, if you compared Berseem to crimson clover on the fall growth, like Joe said, you'll get nice top growth out of Berseem if you get it established, where crimson will stay low to the ground. Yeah, which we probably hear a lot about. I personally haven't seen it in the field, and it's supposed to overwinter, at least to the south of us, is Balanza clover. In this particular plot, we're not having good success having it come up.
So the same field Derek mentioned, we did the deeper peas. We did that in combination with Balanza. It did come up, so it would have been north Manawa area. It wasn't as thick as we would have liked, so it was there, but it wasn't coming in very well. Other places we've tried it. Chris Pollock is one of our Upper Fox demo farmers over by Ripon. He tried to cross seed it early and never really amounted to much. Maybe if you could get it in an early wheat year, after that it might do well. But other than that, we haven't really seen much success up in this area.
Then forage brassica. So this one is a cross between, I don't know whether it's a turnip and anyways, two of the brassicas. What we all know about the brassicas, they tolerate cold temperatures. They'll keep growing all fall, give you nice top growth. This is one that's not really going to give you a rut. It was bred to give you top growth for grazing, but it would also make a good cover that way. And the last one is what you see in the whole remainder of this field is the mix that Dale uses, and he plants it in a unique way. And there's samples of the seed. I'll have Dale talk about how he establishes it and what's in the mix.
Okay. Yeah, I've got John Deere 1560 drill, and I've got grass seed on it. So I put the small seeded in the grass seed, and then the larger seeded varieties in the big box. And then if you look, you can see that the big seeded varieties are in 2 rows, and then in between is the small seeded varieties, so that I can set them at different depths. And in the mix is Austrian winter peas, buckwheat, sorghum Sudan grass, medium red clover, yellow blossom sweet clover, daikon radish, kale, Balanza clover, and plantain. Crops again until 2014, and I had several different mixes, and I liked rye radish and crimson clover the best for when I started, and then I've added more species since to get more diversity. I also forgot to mention that I use the volunteer winter wheat is in my cover crop, and I used to struggle with fighting with the winter wheat. You take the winter wheat off, and then you take the straw off and wait for it to green up and then spray it, and then if you put 2,4-D in or something, then you wait another week and you lose a lot of time and a lot of growth, and finally decided to quit fighting with the winter wheat and work with it. It's there, it's free, and it's beneficial.
Yep, it did. All right.